This is Craft Brewing, and we're doing a brew day. I'm your host, Ty Burrows.
And I'm the pretty face behind everything here. Yeah, we're going to do an all-grain brew day, Brew style, so firmly grip your wood and get ready, because we're brewing.
Alright, so you got me to come over here. What are we doing today?
We are going to be running an all-grain brew day here, Brew style.
Yeah. What are we making?
We're going to be making a Belgian Golden Strong.
Okay. And so talk to me about that. What is that?
It's going to be super awesome. This is pretty much going to surpass Duvel, which is pretty much a classic example of that. And by that I mean it's going to suck. Worse than that. But
Alright.
we'll give it a whirl, see what can happen.
You don't think we can come close?
Should be able to come pretty close. I mean, it's a pretty simple recipe. So yeah, it's just gonna be big, alcoholic, really dry, highly carbonated, sexy.
Alright. And so what sort of system are we going to build that on?
We'll be doing this on my cooler mash tun system. So this is kind of like, you know, I mean, a system that just anybody can build for themselves. And I mean, I've got a couple extra toys tossed into the mix, but it can be yours. Yeah, I mean, anybody can pretty much do this as long as they build a few things.
Alright, so just need a cooler mash tun. Imagine we're going to be working on a turkey fryer.
Yep, turkey fryer for a heating system,
Okay.
a homemade wort chiller, brew kettle, I don't know.
Cool.
We'll see. You'll see.
Oh, I have seen.
Yeah, you
But
might-
they haven't seen.
I know. Somebody will learn something. Probably be us.
Probably. Well, let's see if we can fuck stuff up.
Alright, so now I'm just going to quickly measure my hops. I've got some Saaz and some Magnum. Now, technically, I mean, this could just be all Saaz in this recipe, but because the Saaz that I have has an alpha acidity of 2.7%, it would take a lot of Saaz to make up the acidity I'm looking for, so I'm just going to kind of dose with a little Magnum because that's 12.5%, which is much higher. So I'm just going to quickly take some of these vacuum sealed and frozen hops, courtesy of Craft Brewing, and quickly measure them out. I'm just shooting for 25 grams of Saaz. A little too much, got a little excited there. Now once this is done, I'm going to re-vacuum seal these and toss them back in to the freezer. And what do I need? 20 grams of Magnum. I'm going to go for a grand total of 45. One for good luck. There we go. Now, I like to, anytime I'm measuring out hops, I like to use these little containers I've got here, throw a lid on them, piece of tape with the time that I like to toss them in. That really helps, especially if I'm doing like a different beer, like big American beers that have hops across several different time segments. I can just keep them sealed, nothing's going to spill in there and make a mess of any kind, and I know exactly at which point during the boil I should be adding them. So there we go, hops weighed out, done. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is just weigh out my grain, get my grain built together really quickly, and for this particular beer, the Belgian Golden Strong, it's pretty simple. It's basically just, I'm going to use Canada Malting Superior Pilsen, which is an awesome malt, and I'm going to use just a little bit of carafoam just to make sure it's nice and foamy and sweet, and then it's just some sugar beyond that, so this couldn't be easier. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and use my super awesome scoop and just measure out some grain after I turn on my scale, of course. Just going to break this up into two different measurements. So for the Pilsner here, I'm going to use 3.9 kilograms for this. Perfect. And with my Carafoam, use 200 grams. I'm probably being a little bit more careful than I need to be, but whatever. There you go, 200 grams. And yeah, that's the grain bill. Does this beer make me look fat? My grain's almost milled. Right now I'm also heating up the water in the turkey fryer so that by the time this is done, the water should be just about ready and there's not really a lot of downtime in between the, you know, the grain is ready and the water is ready. Just boom, make it happen. Done really quickly. Okay, so what I've got here is just a really simple cooler mash tun. This is what I use on a regular basis. I've got two sizes. I've got this 5-gallon as well as a 10-gallon. Now, even though this is going to be like an 8 or 9% beer, which usually takes quite a bit of grain, and in those situations I need to use a 10-gallon mash tun, because so much of the sugar from this is coming from, well, sugar, I can still get away with my smaller tun. I get a better efficiency and it's sweet. On the inside of this, I've simply got a false bottom, some silicone going to fittings with just a ball valve on the outside. So at this point what I like to do is take my strike water, I heat it up higher than I need it to go, I'll dump it into here, throw the cap on, let it sit for 5 minutes, it kind of just equalizes, I come back to it, see what the temperature is and adjust it from there. And then I've got the perfect temperature for hitting my mash. Just gonna grab the water and in we go. Screw that on, give it 5 minutes or so just to make sure everything's good. We'll come back and check it out soon. Okay, so it's been about 5 minutes. I'm just going to crack this open, take a peek and see what's going on here. We're going to use the old El Cheapo probe thermometer, 10 bucks at Superstore. Get a good indication of what the temperature's at here. Climbing, climbing, climbing. We are sitting at, okay, so we just passed 162. It's looking like we're probably going to wind up about 165. So I like to use like a little borosilicate liquid measure. It's going to swap out mash strike water for sparge water so I can keep my volume the same. But I'll be able to adjust the temperature. The old mash paddle stirring that up. So we've got what? Climbing, climbing, climbing. 161. Yep, perfect. Okay, just a touch over 162. I don't think 0.5 degree Fahrenheit is really going to upset me too terribly much. So now I'm just going to add my grains here, which as you can see have a pretty nice little crush on them. So I'm just going to dump these all in. Stir as I go. Some guys like to take more time adding this. I don't know, I just pretty much add them so that it's not getting too clumpy or anything like that, but also so that I'm not going to spend all day sitting here trying to add my grains. This process takes long enough as it is. Here. Get everything in there. Give it a nice stir. Fortunately, at this point, we don't need to be worried about sanitation. So I can stick my dirty fingers wherever I damn well please. Just get them in here, mix everything up. Try to avoid hot and cold spots. I like to kind of drag just a little bit around the bottom. Give it a good stir. Knock everything off. Fire the lid back on here. I'm just going to let it sit for a few minutes. I'm actually going to start I just used my the stopwatch on my watch for my mash times. Give it about 60 minutes. I'm going to start it now. I'll come back in a few after everything's sort of equalized. Make sure my mash temperature is good, which it should be, and I'll be good to go from there. Go drink a few beers and I'm ready to come back. Okay, so I'm coming back to check after a few minutes. We'll see what the mash temperature's at. I'm not going to tell you what I'm shooting for so I don't look like a fool if I miss it. Oh, but it looks like I'm going to be good. Going for around 149 actually, so 148, climbing slightly. Okay, 149.3, 149.0. Yeah, you know what? The proof is in the pudding. Or the mash, I suppose. There we go. Okay, a few minutes into the mash, let that go for about 60 minutes. Done. Okay, so one other quick thing. While I've got the mash going, I like to just put all my sparge water into the boil kettle, fire it up. It's not going to be quite as hot as I need it. I've got a 10-minute timer on this stupid regulator of mine here on the propane tank. But it'll get it preheated decently enough so that by the time I'm ready to add my sparge water, I'll be able to have my, my sparge water heated up to where I need it to, so there's no lag time in between draining my initial mash and adding the sparge water, because that's a real pain in the ass if you have to wait around another 20 minutes for that to be ready. There we go. Alright, so we've just passed 60 minutes here on the mash. What I'm going to do now is just do a quick starch conversion test, which is going to be pretty simple. I haven't had issues with this for a few years now, but I'm just going to test because that's what I do every single time and I'm a creature of habit. So I'm just going to start to run off my wort. I'm going to quickly capture just a wee bit of it. Capture a little bit of it here in a dish. I like to use white because it'll actually show up. The whole idea is you take iodine, and the iodine will bond to starch molecules in the wort, and if there is any starch left, it turns sort of a purpley black color. But if it does this and just goes red, reddish brown, then you are pretty damn safe to say that any starch has been converted into sugar. Okay, because there would be like pearls of, big pools of purpley black in there if there was still starch. So we're good to go. So it's time to run off. So I'm just going to keep that going. I'm just going to quickly Vorlauf is a German word for recycling the runnings, which has been the source of many inappropriate jokes here at Craft Brewing. So I'm going to run that off. And now something I like to do when I'm going to run off the first liter or two of wort here, I'm going to throw it back into the mash tun. I'm just going to use a plate like this, a little plastic plate, to disperse it so I'm not creating some sort of a huge cone or a funnel into the mash bed there. So if you look at this now, like it's running out really clearly. I'm not getting a whole lot of chunks of grain coming in there. So I know that it's created a nice filter in here. So I'm just going to pour it in. Nice and gently. And all that wort's going to filter back through because there's quite a bit of grain and chunky shit in this. So we'll avoid having that in the eventual boil. Good enough. So we'll do this. This will take, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 minutes to run off, during which time that water, the sparge water that I preheated, I'm just going to crank that back on, make sure I get back up to maybe 185 Fahrenheit or so, and then that'll be good to add into this here shortly. What I'm going to do now is I've drained out my initial mash water here, so all the initial runnings are out. So I'm just going to crack open my super sweet mash tun here, and I've got my sparge water. Now with this setup here, I've actually got about twice as much sparge water as I can fit in at one time. So I'm just going to eyeball it and throw in about half the sparge water to start. I'm going to spill as much as I can on Ty's shoes. There we go. Good. Throw my lid on. I'm going to give it a good stir just to mix everything up, distribute the heat. What I like to do with my sparge water in this is I run it at about 185 degrees Fahrenheit, and that usually takes my mash temperature up to the high 160s, which is great for just slowing down or stopping enzymatic conversion. Mix it all up, get everything all up in there. And now, actually I've got a little bit of room. I'm going to squeeze just a wee bit more of the water in there. The idea at this point is I'm going to let it sit for about 10 minutes and just let that mash bed sort of settle again, create a nice filter so that I can run off the wort. At that point I'm going to boil off one more time, recycle those runnings, drain the mash tun, fire in the rest of the sparge water, and repeat. And I always like to throw in about an extra liter or so of sparge water so that I know for sure that I'll hit my target volume. And I'll just, once I start to drain, I'm going to be running into my boil kettle. I've got a nice little volume control thing that you'll see, just so I can gauge exactly where it's going. I'll know when to cut it off. That's it. Let it go for 10 minutes. Alright, so I collected my 6.5 gallons that I need for this brew. Right now we're heating it up, approaching the boil. What I'm going to do now, something I like to use is Firm Cap S, which is just a great product to help prevent explosive boil over from the boil. You just need, I don't know, 4 or 5 drops or so in the wort, and then as it approaches the boil, it's actually going to form like it just kind of like a thick crust over top. It's going to start to boil underneath. That crust will dissipate, and you'll be golden. No weird explosions or wort all over your garage. Yeah, it works really well. So we're just playing the waiting game now. Brewing in Canada in November sucks. Alright, so we are just starting to hit a boil here. It's been about 10 or 15 minutes or so. And as you can see, we're starting to get some serious action over here. Those firm caps have really prevented any kind of massive inclination towards an overflow or boil over or anything like that. And I'm just going to start to dial back the... Ooh, there we go. Start to dial things back a little bit from the propane. Turn the heat down a wee bit. Just because there's no sense in boiling super crazy. So we'll just let that do its thing. Let it calm down. Dial in the propane regulator where it needs to be. And let it go for another half hour. We're going to do a 90-minute boil on this because we're using some Pilsner malt. Actually, a lot of Pilsner malt. And let it go for that 90-minute boil just to help reduce potential DMS in the finished product. And at 60 minutes, we're going to add our first hops. So we'll see you then. All right, so I didn't want you to see it, so I did it before we turned the camera on. Just pounded in the hops here. You can see them. You can taste them. You can smell them, and they're delicious. Yeah, so we're going to let this crank away for another hour. And after that, we're just going to chill, whirlpool, rack into the carboy, pitch the yeast, and we're done. So pretty much the majority of the hard stuff's done, and at this point it's just trying to deal with the beers and the haze. For Craft Brewing, I'm Jeremy. Keep it real.